Welcome to another episode of the Into the Wilderness podcast. I'm sitting in the studio with my brother, as always.
Hello.
Daryl Pace.
I'm here.
And if you are a new listener, I'm Byron Pace. We have new listeners every month, and I can tell you, as of about an hour ago, we've broken our monthly record again.
Woo!
So we actually had more people download the show this month than we had on the month that we had Donnie Vincent.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Astounding. And people are still listening to his show and every other show right the way back to episode 1.
And that's down to all of our listeners and passing on the message about the show.
Yeah, it's so important to do that because the whole point of this is that it's a way to let people inside and outside the world of the countryside and shooting access really good information and debate. But
I was going to say something.
Go for it.
Today, so if you're downloading on the Thursday, what is the date today? What's the actual date? I shall find out. Thursday, the 28th of July, you will be able to see our next episode of Into the Wilderness tonight at some point.
That's brave, Daryl. That's very brave. Yeah. It's we haven't rendered.
If not, it's
copy.
Friday.
Yeah, very, very shortly. So if you don't know about our Into the Wilderness series, you should definitely go and check it out. It's on YouTube. Just search Pace Brothers Into the Wilderness. Like Daryl said, new episode's going to be out either tonight or tomorrow.
Yep.
We have a competition winner. Let's get that out of the way first.
Yep.
2 weeks ago, we gave everybody the opportunity to win a set of Coldwell shooting sticks. I'm just going to hold them up for those people who are watching on YouTube. This was them. Coldwell buy sticks.
Yep. Remember, we give away prizes every 2 weeks on the show. So why wouldn't you want to listen to the show?
Yeah. But and why wouldn't you want to enter?
Why wouldn't you want to enter? So therefore, everyone, we're giving them every 2 weeks. We've given away a load of prizes. How many do you think we've given away now?
You know, I think next time we're gonna list everything we've given away because I'd have to go and actually write it down. But Bushnell headlamps,
trophy cam. I can't remember.
A ton of Bushnell stuff and a ton of Coldwell stuff.
Yeah.
Bipod, Paul Wilkie,
yep.
who won it, he's coming to pick it up just shortly, actually, from our office. But anyway, 2 weeks ago, gave you a chance to win these Coldwell shooting sticks, and right now we're about to announce the winner. You had to enter by tagging us on Instagram. We have an account, Pace_Brothers. Go check that out. And the winner, we looked through all the people who tagged us, and Anthony O'Duffy, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but I think so. You are the winner because you clearly are very dedicated. You tagged us in a couple of pictures, and we like what you got to show us.
Yep.
So it looks like you have a great time in the countryside.
You do. So don't forget to claim your prize because we've had one unclaimed prize, which has actually been given away again now. You have 1 month.
Yes, you do.
It's nice and fair, 1 month, and you can. Otherwise, we'll give it away. Right.
Well, we'll tell you what you can win on this show, and we're going to tell you how to enter at the end of the
show.
End of the show. Yeah. So this week we have a Spyderco folding knife, which we will put some pictures up on our Facebook page. I'm going to hold it up to the camera for the YouTube watchers. Spyderco make some really very cool knives.
We've given away their mini knives.
Yeah, we have.
We have.
Live at the Northern Shooting Show.
Show.
Yes, we did. We gave away 2 little mini knives, which are superb. I use my one all the time. I've had it for quite a few years. If you don't know the brand Spyderco, just Google them. Go check them out online, and we'll put the picture up of the knife that you have a chance to win. Unfortunately, you will have to be over 18 years old because of UK laws to be able to enter this. But if you are interested in winning the Spyderco folding knife, then have a listen at the end of the show. We will tell you how to easily enter and win.
Yep. Who's today's guest?
We are bringing you none other than Diggory Hadoke.
Yep. The man himself who faced down Piers Morgen.
He did. He faced down the wrath of Piers Morgen, and he did a mighty fine job in incredibly difficult circumstances. And of course, we will be talking about that interview today. Actually, more than that, we're going to actually let you listen to that interview that he did on with Piers Morgen and Susanna Reid.
A few things about this show, everyone, is one, apologize. We apologize for the audio quality at the first part of the show. No fault of our own. It's
terrible rural broadband.
Yeah, terrible rural broadband. And then you'll notice an audio change when we go into the things that have been pre-recorded, such as the Piers Morgen interview, and also when Diggory is reading out some hate mail, which is probably one of the most hilarious things I think I've heard for a long time.
Yeah, it's for the most part it's good, but there's just one or two little instances in there just slightly below our high quality recording levels.
But there's loads in this show. We're talking about conservation. We're talking about
hunting ethics.
We're talking about old weapons, auctions. If you want to go to an auction, we talk about that.
He's an incredibly interesting chap who has done a lot in his life, and there's probably few people, not just in this country, but the world over, who know more about old vintage guns than he does. And indeed, he's written a couple of books about it. But you're going to hear all about that right now. There's two things that we wanted to touch on just before we get right into this interview. The first is that there has just been a grant of £1.15 million given by the Heritage Lottery Fund towards increasing the opportunities and proliferation of golden eagles in the southern part of Scotland. That might sound very good, however, my initial reaction was, what a terrible place to try and do it. We're going to hopefully get somebody on at some point in the future to talk about it, but it seems like a colossal amount of money to encourage golden eagles in a place that they don't nest successfully already, and there are far better places in Scotland that golden eagles actually want to live, do live, and breed successfully.
So they should probably be spending part of that money making sure the ones that are breeding successfully carry on.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. It almost seems like people have looked at a point on the map and said, oh, there's no golden eagles here. Let's spend a lot of money to try and bring them here. Well, hang on a second. You need habitat and food sources and a place that they actually want to nest.
You've always got to ask the question, outside of persecution, why are they not there? So if there's no persecution going on, there must be an underlying reason. But what Byron just said, is the habitat wrong or right? Is the cliffs for them to land on? Is there the correct food source? You've got to ask these questions first.
So that's an interesting one, but it seems like a little bit of a waste of money to me. But we'll dig into it more in the future. And the last thing is that a lot of people probably have seen in the last week that John Swift, who was the head of Basque, recently was a guest blogger on none other than Mark Avery's blog. Mark Avery probably is the most vocal anti-hunting, anti-grouse shooting person.
Anti-rich, anything that...
anything to do with
anything that
shooting.
sells his book, to be honest.
That is very true, Daryl. Anything that sells his book. Yeah, he is probably the biggest proponent of anti-grouse shooting in this country. And John Swift went and did a guest blog on his page. He was also the chair of the Lead Ammunition Group. And it makes for fairly uncomfortable reading if you read that, because there is a man who was head of the biggest organisation in the UK for 25 years. He was involved. And I have serious questions over to his actual leanings. Not just towards shooting, but also towards the Lead Ammunition Group and his role there. And from all the evidence that I've read with regard to that, I don't think that enough was done to try and prove it either way. I don't think enough effort went into actually proving that, you know what, lead for shooting is absolutely fine.
They put it to bed, basically.
And put it to bed. And even if it turned out at the end of the day it wasn't, not enough effort went into actually trying to prove it in the first place. So there are a lot of things that could have been done that were not done. And he was the lead during that time, over a period of 5 years. I think we just have to ask some serious questions of how a man like that ended up the head of one of the biggest shooting organizations in this country. It's something that we will undoubtedly tackle again at a later date.
It's interesting. I'm sure some more stuff will unfold in the coming months.
I am sure. This podcast is supported and brought to you by the Scottish Association for Country Sports. We say it quite often, but if you want to keep up to date with the latest goings on in the countryside, be that shooting or fishing or dogs related or anything to do with countryside pursuits, go check out their Facebook page, because that is updated on a daily, if not hourly basis sometimes, if there's a lot of news coming out.
Yep.
We hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Diggory, thank you very much for joining us today on the podcast. We're going to get into the meat of what everybody, I'm sure, is going to want to hear from you about, which is your interview with Piers Morgen, which was only a couple of months ago now, I guess. But before we get to that, I want to know a little bit about you, about the man himself, and how you got to where you are today. Your early life, how you built up a fascination with hunting and particular guns, and also your career in academics, which was something I didn't know about until I was doing a bit of research for this podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always nice to come and talk about these things to people who are interested, particularly to put a perspective on things which go below the surface, which unfortunately in mainstream media and the tabloids, people like Piers like to really avoid the uncomfortable nuances in the argument and just work on assumptions and misinformation, which is really a shame. But going back to where I come from, I was an army child, I suppose. My dad was a doctor in the army, and we were based in Cyprus, Bahrain, Germany. Travelled around. The family's an army family. My grandparents were in India. My grandfather was a career soldier and officer in the Gurkhas. And so my father was born in India while they were serving there. So it seemed a fairly natural thing for Dad to go into the army and for us to travel as well. So it was a fairly fluid childhood until we came back to Shropshire when I was 5 years old, and he took a job as a general practitioner in a country practice, and I went to the local school where my headmaster, Tony Shepherd, happened to be a gun collector.
Okay.
So my dad always had a few guns around, 10 or 15, I suppose, just stuck in a cupboard that I used to have an interest in, but he wasn't really a very keen shooter. And then my school teacher would go to the Birmingham gun auctions at the weekends and come back on a Monday and stick a load of guns on his desk in front of all us 7 and 8 year olds and say, "Hey boys, come and have a look at what I bought at the gun auction."
That is tremendous. I really wish that had happened when I was
I
in
can't
school.
say I've ever heard of a story where I got this from school.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. What a teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. He was great. And so the other things, of course, it was being in the countryside. I used to run around with the local gamekeeper. There wasn't much to do at home. We were half a mile away from the nearest other house. So I spent most of my childhood with an air rifle wandering around in the field shooting rabbits, catching fish in the local streams with an old fly rod. And that's how I spent most of my time. And then a lot of my friends who were farmers' sons used to find old rifles and shotguns and things in their chicken sheds and their barns. And because they knew I liked guns, they'd bring them and give them to me, and I'd soak them in buckets of oil and take them to bits and find out how they worked and clean them up as best I could and put them back together again and see if I could make them work again. All this is probably giving somebody somewhere a heart attack. Back in the 1970s, some rural child was dismantling and reassembling firearms on a completely illegal basis. But it was the 70s, and everybody in the country had a gun. Licensing laws were different. For a shotgun license, you could have as many shotguns as you wanted. Nobody knew who got what or how many. And it was a sort of crossover period, I think, between the old days where everybody in the countryside spent pretty much all their time wandering around shooting from the age of 7 or 8 upwards. I certainly did, to the period we're at now, where everybody is super paranoid about their children, and they're constantly supervised and never let out of sight and never trusted with anything sharper than a crayon. I think it's a shame, really.
Yeah, no, we'd agree with that.
So that was the early childhood, and then my shooting career carried on like that. Air rifle aged 8, shotgun age 12, shooting rabbits and pigeons, beating on the local shoot. And then a chap called Peter Williams set up a gun shop in Ludlow. He came in from Birmingham, and I used to go to the Birmingham gun quarter with him and photograph the guns that he had for sale and send them around the countryside so that he could do his gun dealing. Because, of course, in those days there was no internet, and if you wanted to sell a gun, you had to take photographs, get them developed at Boots, send them in an envelope to somebody, answer questions by telephone or letter, and it was all a more tortuous process.
Wow. You don't even think about
no,
that,
you don't. You don't think about how difficult it was.
No, indeed. All much easier these days. You know, I operate globally now and sell guns all over the world, mostly by email and telephone call. My academic life was sparked in 1989 when I moved out and spent a year traveling in India. Then ended up in Thailand. I went over there partly because I didn't want to come back to England. I was very bored of England. Wanted to expand my horizons a bit. I also was studying Thai boxing, so Bangkok seemed like the best place to do that. And so I spent 5 years out in Bangkok and started off teaching unqualified in some rubbish little conversation English language schools. Found out I quite liked the interaction and the teaching, and it was a good way of earning enough money to stay in Thailand and do what I wanted to do. So I went off and got qualified, came back, got a better job, ended up teaching in a university. Then I came back to England, took further qualifications, taught in London, went into teacher training, eventually went into academic management, and ended up running 4 schools in London. I became a moderator for Trinity College London, assessing teacher training courses, and an examiner for Cambridge on their English language side, assessing foreign students and their English language progress. And I stayed doing that for best part of 12 years.
And what was your transition out of that? Why did you leave that behind and do, I assume, what you're doing now?
Boredom, I think. I hesitate to say it, but perhaps I peaked a little bit too soon in what I was doing. I was an academic director by the time I was 30, and was very motivated. And I dare say I was pretty good at it. I was running a good school, good teacher training courses. I had a good team around me. I'd achieved quite a lot, and so the next few years involved, keeping that going. For want of a better word, treading water. Which after a while, although it was quite well paid and it was a very nice life and I enjoyed the environment, I didn't really feel stimulated, and I started a business based on my writing, which was vintageguns.co.uk in the early-ish days of internet businesses, about 2002, 2003. Set a website up largely to field the communication I was getting from America and elsewhere on the back of the writing I was doing for the Double Gun Journal, which you may be familiar with.
Yes.
So it's an American magazine, a quarterly, high quality, and I was writing 3, 4, 5, 6,000 word articles for them, initially on British gun auctions. And the American readership in particular picked up on this and started to get in contact and say things like, well, you wrote about this gun in your last article. I want one like that. Can you find me one? Or they'd say, well, you're going to Holt's, I understand, or Bonham's for their next auction. This gun's in it. Would you mind looking at it for me and letting me know if it's any good? So quite often I'd go along and I'd look at a gun and I'd send a report back to them and say, it's fine, but it needs X, Y, and Z done to it. And they want to know what it was worth, and I advised them as best I could. And then they'd come back and say, well, can you buy it for me? And if it needs all that work, can you get the work done? And then can you export it to America for me?
Okay.
So this started to build up, all running through the website that I'd started, and it began to become a business. And it became a tipping point where the business, the part-time business, the gun dealing side of it and the writing, started to get in the way of my sensible job. And it also coincided with a time where I was perhaps more passionate about the new business than I was about the old one. And I came to a crossroads, and I thought, if I have to work for another 22 years, because that's what I've been doing up to that point, wouldn't it be nice to actually do something different and take a bit of a risk? Because I really had to make a choice at that point to either stop the part-time business that was interfering with the sensible job, or stop the sensible job.
I know those sentiments exactly, because it's almost exactly what I've just done. But yeah, it does take a bit of a jump. But if it's something that you really love, then yeah, which I know from your writing and obviously the business that you do now, it might be a business, but it's also a clear passion.
Yeah, absolutely.
It helps when you get paid to do something you truly, truly love.
It certainly does. I think the only caveat there is somebody once said to me, if you start doing your hobby as a job, you need to get another hobby.
Yes, no, that is true. Fishing's my escape from that, because I have no commercial involvement in fishing, so I just go fishing for enjoyment.
Very good, yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the auctions and vintage guns. I have a fairly limited knowledge of vintage guns, but a fascination with them. In fact, you're talking about Bonhams. I was actually in the Bonham stand at Scone Palace this weekend, looking at some very nice takedown old Rigbys. For people who have this sort of want to own something old, what would your advice be in terms of going to auctions? Because it's quite a daunting thing. You go there, there's hundreds and hundreds of guns of every spectrum and age. What would you say to people who just have that want to own a little piece of the past but don't quite know where to start?
Well, an auction is probably not the right place to go to start.
Okay.
It's a good place to go to get an education. If you go to auctions, the good thing about it is you've got all this stuff that you can pick up, you can look at, you can take to bits, you can examine properly. You get a real feeling for how various mechanisms work. You start to notice what goes wrong with them. You get to notice what is wrong with guns that have got into the auctions. You start to realize what something should look like and when it looks wrong, and then establish why it looks wrong and what's been done to it and what needs to be done about it. But in short, I wouldn't go to our auction and buy a Land Rover. Mm-hmm. I have a Land Rover. I know what a Land Rover looks like, and I drive mine all the time. But I don't know enough about Land Rovers to go to an auction, have a quick look around one, and then spend £5,000 or £6,000 and hope that it's okay. I know enough about people that mess about with Land Rovers to know that quite a lot of these that have gone into an auction have gone into an auction for a very good reason. Mm-hmm. Guns are the same. So I would say in an auction, a lot of the stuff that's there is there because the trade have put it into an auction. Yeah, if I put something into an auction, it's because I never want to see it again.
Okay.
And the reason that dealers put things into auctions they never want to see again is because if they sell it retail and it goes wrong, somebody's going to bring it back and expect you to put it right, and that costs a lot of money. So you put something to an auction, wave goodbye to it, and you will never see it again. The auctioneers sell them as described. So if the description is quite small, it's a 12-bore shotgun with 30-inch barrels. As long as it's a 12-bore shotgun with 30-inch barrels, anything else is fair game. Mm-hmm. You know, you pull the trigger on day one, the fore end falls off and the stock breaks in half. Bad luck. Whereas you do that retail, you come back and you expect the dealer to put it right. So I have to say, you know, auctions are really where I started my business, because I built the business on going to auctions for people and looking at stuff and, you know, giving them appraisals on the things they were interested in to give them some confidence that what they were bidding on was actually a bid that they were doing with their eyes open, or in more cases than not, deterring people from bidding on something they were thinking of bidding on because there were good reasons for avoiding it.
Sure.
What you don't want to do is go and spend £14,000 or £15,000 on a gun and then get it home and realise it needs £5,000 spent on it, and when you've spent £5,000 on it, it's worth £10,000.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, if you're interested in purchasing old guns, go and learn at an auction. But if you're going to buy, until you know what you're looking at, probably go to somebody who knows more about it than you and who actually sells them as a business.
Absolutely, or just use somebody as a sounding board. You know, no, certainly go into these things with your eyes open. Don't go in hoping that nobody else has noticed what you've thought. Very difficult to get a bargain at an auction because the whole of the gun trade is there. Now, so you can't buy a £10,000 Purdy for £5,000 because everybody else is too stupid to notice, and it just fails under the radar. Everybody that knows what they're talking about is there, and if they're not bidding on it, there's probably a good reason.
Okay.
The other thing you see at auctions that people do all the time is, and this is an argument that I've heard people use. They say, well, if I bought it at an auction for £10,000, well, the bids were going up in £500 increments. So at the very worst, that gun's worth £9,500 because somebody else bid up to £9,500.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's assuming the person that was bidding against you knows what they were doing. And they weren't just as stupid as you and bidding up your coattails, which happens all the time. The old mantra I use is you can't bid against stupid. And you certainly shouldn't, because if I've often looked at something and noted what's wrong with it, and had people bidding strongly on it because they hadn't noticed what was wrong with it and were bidding on the assumption that it was something other than what it actually was.
And I guess that gets other people excited as well if they're seeing, hang on, someone's bidding.
Someone else who knows more than me thinks there's some value in the gun.
Yeah, it can happen. And of course, you get that buyer's frenzy in an auction house. People forget about the commission, so they bid £10,000 and think it's £10,000, and then they have to write a cheque for £13,000. But that's not in their mind when they're bidding. People are very bad at doing that mental calculation. They get carried away. And then I've quite often found that guns will sometimes make more in an auction than they will in a private sale. There's something odd about the public that they will bid really strongly at an auction, whereas if you show them a gun and say, look, I've got this gun for sale, it's this much money, they won't buy it.
I think it's part of the excitement.
Yeah. Are there particular sections of the vintage market that are growth areas in terms of investment? I know that there have been certain areas of the past where it sort of comes up cyclically, where it has been a good sector to say invest in high-end pairs of shotguns like your Purdy's, and then it tends to fall off again. What is going on right now that is a growth sector for investment? If you're looking purely to put your money into guns, partly because you enjoy them, but partly as an investment, where should people be looking?
Well, let's start with the first part, guns as investments. When people come to me and say, I want to buy a gun as an investment, what should I buy? I say, don't buy guns as investments.
Okay.
Buy guns because you like them. Now, and buy the guns that you like. Now, the worst that can happen if you buy a gun that you like is that the market goes down, the gun becomes worth less than you paid for it, but you're stuck with a gun that you like and can use and enjoy using. Mm-hmm. So the market over the last 20 or 30 years has shown that generally if you buy a good gun in good quality, in good condition, use it and look after it, after 5 or 6 years, if you decide to sell it, you'll probably get your money back and you may even make some money on it. But you shouldn't, I don't think, go into it with that in mind, because it can go the other way. And I've seen people buy guns and spend a lot of money on them and try and sell them 2 or 3 years later and lose money. Of course, like any investment, this only becomes an issue if you have to sell it when the market's depressed. If the state of the market is irrelevant unless and until you come to sell. My general advice beyond what I've just given would be buy the best quality you can afford in the best condition you can afford. Don't go and spend money on a really tired old Purdy just because you want to have a Purdy. Far better off buying an Atkin in much better condition, or a Lang, or something else without the universally known name, because you'll get more for your money. This also comes down to getting the best value. Of course, when it comes to selling, brand value is a key part of it. It's always easier to sell a Purdy than it is to sell anything else, a Purdy or a Boss. This is largely because of universal recognition. Everybody knows Rolex watches. Everybody knows Purdy shotguns. Everybody knows Cohiba cigars. So there's a certain cachet in having those things. Although people that really know cigars and really know shotguns and really know watches, will often be found having and using and appreciating other things.
For sure, sure. Where your own personal fascination within the vast spectrum of vintage guns that you deal with, is it double rifles? Is that where your sort of heart lies? If you had to pick out one particular type of rifle shotgun?
From a shooting point of view, I'm a shotgunner rather than a rifle shooter. I have spent and do spend a lot more time shooting birds than I do shooting animals. I've shot plenty of animals, but I think bird shooting is my go-to sport really, and therefore shotguns are really my number one weapon of choice. And the guns that I find I use more than anything else are probably 1870s 12-bore hammer guns. Quite old-fashioned technology, typically with a Jones underlever, maybe rebounding locks. I've got a couple that I use a lot. One's got rebounding, one's got non-rebounding locks. Both made in the 1870s, mid-1870s. They're bar action guns. By makers of no particular repute. One's by a chap called J. Thompson, and the other one is by Thorn, W. Thorn of the Strand. They're not household names, but they're beautiful guns, and I shoot them well. I've got probably a gun room at the moment, and the ones that I pick up and shoot are not the Purdy 20-bore ever and under, or the Boss side-by-side ejector. It's the old stuff. I shot for years with an 1889 Purdy sidelock ejector, and I ended up selling it because I found I was leaving it in the cupboard all the time and taking out the old hammer guns. And I've shot them all over the world, and I actually prefer them to anything else. It's not an affectation. I don't think that I'm hamstringing myself by using old guns. I actually think they work better if you understand them and know how to use them. Well, in terms of the absolute mechanical wizardry that's involved in putting something together, I think that there's nothing that betters an 1870s or 1880s Black Powder Express double hammer rifle. I think the way that they're made, and I think the materials, the understanding of proportion, the gun making skills that went into building and regulating and finishing those weapons were just. I just don't think the workmanship's ever been bettered. You can still buy one for about under £5,000 with a lot of original finish on it in very good condition, and I just don't think in terms of quality and history. There's a mechanical object that you can buy that compares.
Yeah, they are. There is also something about them that is kind of hard to put into words in terms of using them that can't really be compared with anything else.
I've shot plenty of them, and they're beautiful. I've never hunted anything with one. I've hunted with double rifles. I was in Tanzania last year, and I hunted buffalo with a brand new Wesley Richards 5.77 double, which was fabulous. For me, that really cemented the debate between calibers for big game hunting and the way that big game hunting can be conducted. For me, the hunting of dangerous game, the point of it is that it's dangerous, and that means you need to get close to it. There's nothing very dangerous about a buffalo at 80 yards being shot off sticks with a scope rifle. But when you're 15 yards away in long grass and you're trying to get close enough to it to shoot it with open sights, then that certainly gets the concentration going and gets the blood pumping. And and puts you, on better terms with the animal that you're hunting. And I think that's really what it's about for me. And when you're 12 or 15 yards away from a rather ugly looking buffalo that could spoil your day if things go wrong, you really want horsepower. And a short barreled 5.77 delivers plenty of horsepower.
Yeah, for sure. I have to say it's one caliber I haven't had the, I was going to say pleasure of shooting, although I'm not quite sure how much pleasure there would be in shooting it a lot. Maybe hunting with it, but maybe not shooting with it on the range.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a fallacy what people talk about when it's where it concerns powerful cartridges. If the gun's properly built and it fits you correctly, and the weight of the rifle match the ammunition, and the proportions are correct, it's not uncomfortable to shoot. I mean, it's no more uncomfortable than shooting a 12-bore shotgun. I think you're right. If you're sitting on if you're on a range and you're firing shot after shot after shot, or if you make the mistake of trying to fire heavy rifles from a bench rest, particularly a sitting bench rest, then you're asking for trouble. But once these things are regulated, you shoot them very much like a shotgun, open sights, but really you're concentrating on your quarry and you're shooting it quickly, and it should all be fairly instinctive.
Yeah, there is a big difference between what you might. I never know whether it's what you perceive as the recoil and impact of it when you're shooting, compared to when you're hunting. But it is a totally different affair, and you can cope with a lot more when you're actually hunting. I think probably part of it's to do with you're in the moment, the adrenaline's up slightly, and it's the last thing on your mind.
Different environment completely, isn't it?
Exactly.
It is, yeah. But I think also when you're shooting a large rifle from a standing position, your body absorbs the recoil and your body moves with the recoil. When you're at a bench rest or when you're at a standing rest, the tendency is to lean into it and to become more static. I think, going back to my martial arts, the idea that you bend like a bamboo. And I think you do that when you're shooting a big rifle, and I'm not very heavy. I'm 6 feet tall. I weigh about 180 about 80 kilos, 82 kilos. So I'm not a heavy guy, but I've never suffered from recoil. And I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that, you move with the recoil. You accept it rather than just absorb it like a punch.
Yeah, it's actually a very important point to point that out to people if they're shooting it for the first time. I had a 470 Nitro Heim on test a year ago or something, and I took it up to where I do all my rifle testing, and there's a few gamekeepers up there who are friends of mine. I said, hey guys, if you want to come down, not often you get a chance to shoot something like this, come and I'll let you have a shot or 2 shots if you really want. And that was the first thing I said to him. I said, don't try and take this, just let your body roll with it when you pull the trigger. And everybody listened apart from my one friend, Adam, who stood sort of bent over it a little bit, clearly expecting it and waiting to sort of fight the recoil. And yeah, he suffered for that big time.
Yeah.
I think it's if you watch other people do it first as well, it doesn't help.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but out in the field, when you're concentrating on something big and nasty looking, you certainly don't even notice the recoil.
No, certainly. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the hunting of big game, but it kind of takes us into the Piers Morgen interview. So I want to deal with that first, and then we'll take that, extrapolate that out, and talk about big game hunting a bit more. So for those people who didn't see it, we'll put the link up so people can go and watch it, because I think it is on YouTube. Talk me through that day, why you were there in the first place, how you ended up getting the invite, and then through that interview with Piers Morgen, who it was largely a clown through most of it. But explain it in your own words from sitting in that sofa on TV.
Well, the preamble to it was interesting. That they got in touch with they got in touch via a friend. They were looking for somebody to come on and talk about as they put it, big game hunting and the conservation issues. And how big game hunting contributes to conservation. It was on the back of something that Prince William had said, I think, to David Dimbleby. earlier in that month, where he'd said that properly organised, managed big game hunting had a role in conservation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that sent the Twitter storm off of people assuming that was a terrible thing to say, and that in the mind of the public at large, who don't really look into things and act on emotion, instinct, whatever you want to put it, but certainly not on evidence. They assume that killing big animals is an awful, evil thing to do because they're all endangered, and when you kill one, that's one less, and that's bad, and it's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Which of course it isn't. So they wanted somebody to come on and talk, and the discussion was around, Prince William has said this. Is he right or wrong? So I was briefed a little bit beforehand about what to expect, and Piers Morgan's people asked me to send some photographs. So I sent some photographs of me playing with baby lion cubs, and I sent some photographs of me sitting in the bush with a rifle, and I sent some photographs of me walking in the bush with a rifle, and some various other photographs, and they said thank you very much. And then a little bit later they said, oh, could we have some photographs of you with dead animals? Which I deliberately not sent because I felt it was perhaps going to be either not appropriate or used cynically. So I did send them a photograph of me with a buffalo that I'd shot, which of course was interesting later on because the whole thrust of Piers Morgan's outrage was that he couldn't stand the idea of people taking photographs of themselves with dead animals and making him look at them.
Yeah.
Whereas they'd spent quite a lot of time in making sure that I sent him one of these photographs so that he could get outraged about it on television, which really just shows the hypocrisy of them. But anyway, cut a long story short, I ended up in the TV studio. The people that had briefed me before it came down with a load of questions, and they said this is pretty much what Piers will ask you, and it was about how does hunting help conservation, and what do your friends think of your hobby, and so on and so forth, all fairly innocuous. Of course, when I sat down with him, that wasn't the case at all. He very much went on the attack. He wasn't interested in hearing a defence of trophy hunting or any facts about how managed trophy hunting concessions actually work to sustain and grow populations of endangered animals. Some of the language he used was laughable. He at one point referred to corpulent Americans blasting rhinos with howitzers.
I did laugh at that. Yeah.
He clearly wasn't prepared, and he wasn't working from any basis of research. He was purely venting his own ignorant point of view, really. And it's a shame because Piers Morgan is not a stupid man. Whatever one might think of him in other respects, he's not stupid. He's certainly got the mental capacity to research these things properly. So, although we can't really call into question his intelligence, I think we can call into question his integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to a couple of people in the media before I went on, and they said, look, Piers Morgan's not interested in the truth. He's just interested in promoting Piers Morgan. And to the man's credit, he promoted Piers Morgan quite well through this. Twitter lit up, and the great unwashed were all quite happy to jump on there saying what a great job Piers had done of making the awful, horrible trophy hunter look like an idiot, which just goes to show that the outcome of a discussion is very much in the eye of the beholder, because the people who were involved in hunting and conservation who saw that felt that I'd managed to put across the point reasonably well under difficult circumstances. Whereas people who feel that trophy hunting is evil and terrible and don't want to hear anything else about it thought Piers had done a good job of giving me a kicking.
Yeah, I would say that
Especially when that wasn't even what it was about. It wasn't about giving you a kicking. It was there for you to actually explain what was going on.
Yeah, what the truth
Oh,
is
I think
behind
I
it.
was there for Piers to give me a
Well,
kicking
yeah.
for the delight of his.
Yeah.
It became quite clear by the way that he conducted the interview that he just wanted to sit somebody on the end of the sofa and shout his moral outrage at them.
Yeah, no, it was very clear watching the interview that that was exactly his intention, and it was, as you say, it was a real shame because it was a great opportunity to actually have a proper level-headed debate and discussion. But unfortunately, he very, very clearly had done zero research for that, and if he had done any research at all, then he clearly didn't use any of it, and it was just a venting exercise. And
No, that's absolutely right. And it is a shame because it's not often that we get to put something like this on a public platform in front of the general public and educate them about the reality of what's going on here. And of course, I wasn't there to defend bad practice. And we have to admit that within trophy hunting, within any walk of life, there's good practice, there's bad practice, and there's best practice. And what I was there to try to promote was best practice. Yet, as is often the case in these debates, they will pick out what they consider the worst practice and tar everybody with the same brush as if that's representative of all of us. And of course, it's not. Scratching the surface behind what he was talking about, the particular conservancy where the lion that they all decided to call Cecil came from. 30 years ago, that was just a series of cattle stations with hardly any lions on it at all. Before it was taken on as a hunting concession, the cattle were driven out, and the hunting operations started to control it. The lion population on that land went up from 8 to close to 500. Mm-hmm. Cecil was just one of those 500 lions which happened to be shot. And the circumstances under which that particular lion was shot may or may not have been ideal. It turned out that the chap, Dr. Palmer, the chap that shot him, actually had all the necessary licenses. The Zimbabwean government, if you read up on it, have said that he's very welcome to come back to Zimbabwe anytime he likes. He's not facing any charges and that his paperwork was in order. You probably won't read that in any of the UK newspapers because it doesn't fit the narrative. But of course, we're struggling with this because the general public really don't want to go beyond the simplistic notion that if an animal is endangered, it's endangered everywhere, and that killing one is bad. That there's, of course, a lot more nuanced argument. There's a lot more going on the ground in conservation that requires understanding and study and attention paying to it, and quite a lot of it is counterintuitive. And people, of course, are very reluctant to learn that their opinion is ignorant and based on fallacy. We as humanity, I suppose, are prone to this. I mean, most people buy a newspaper that tells them what they already think and reflects their own prejudices back to them and their own narrative back to them, and they don't go and buy newspapers that challenge them because they don't like that. And I think this is what we face with hunting and conservation: the sort of the Peter narrative, the simplistic narrative is the one that people most easily pick up and ascribe themselves to. It's the easy one, isn't it? It doesn't require any hard work.
No, and the sad thing is that the list of examples, like you just gave, that particular conservancy, there is numbers in there for the increase in population of elephant. In fact, that conservancy that you're referencing there and is related to where Cecil was shot is mentioned in the IUCN report on trophy hunting, and shows it as an example of what hunting can do for conservation in an area such as that. And the list of examples like that is long. And you only have to look at Kenya for exactly what happens when you don't have hunting in a country. But a lot of people, just as you've said, I don't know whether they don't want to hear it or they just don't take the time to understand it. It is very frustrating that we don't have a good platform, and it is largely due to a biased media, and that's probably why we're having this conversation right now, that this information can't be disseminated out and people can make a judgment for themselves.
Because it is there. The information is there to be seen.
But it's not necessarily accessible.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. But we live in a situation at the moment where, even if you look at something like Country File on the BBC, which is very much an urban-based view of the countryside. It's the countryside presented as a playground for urban people to go and look at things and ooh and ah about things. They don't want to see the nitty-gritty of the countryside, that it's actually a living, breathing, working environment in which life and death go on around them. They want a chocolate box idea of what the countryside is like. And anytime they come anywhere near showing gamekeeping in a good light, the benefits of managing predators, the benefits of managing moorland for game shooting, for grouse shooting, they get inundated with outraged emails and texts from the public demanding that they not show these barbarous activities in a good light. And they're ratings driven, and we live in an environment now where if there's a negative Twitter storm about something, then everybody runs for the hills.
I guess a prime example is that Country File did a piece on gamekeeping, and they were actually butchering a deer, I think it was. This is probably 3-4 months back now, and they had a huge amount of people on Twitter complaining because they were disgusted in the fact that a deer was being butchered. I didn't see the thousands of Twitter messages of the morning cooking show when they were cutting meat up and then cooking it with all people laughing around it. It's the same difference.
Well, absolutely, but unfortunately, the uneducated have never been shy about expressing their opinions.
What is your view? The one thing that gets criticised a lot, and it's the easy pickings for social media for the likes of Ricky Gervais. You take there was that Channel 4 program on only a few days ago.
The women who
hunt lions,
or something, yeah.
And that was all sparked.
I saw that. Yeah, I don't actually have a television, but I did make a point of watching that because a friend of mine warned me that it was coming up. So I actually made a trip over to someone else's house and watched it.
Oh, okay.
I let Byron watch it. I didn't watch it because I'm a bit like you. I don't have a TV either. So if it's on live TV, I don't see it.
So yeah, and my question with regard to that, and we can actually talk about the program since you did watch it, is that the reason why that all started, really, if you boil it down, was pictures posted on social media. So the one picture for the one lady whose name I forget is of her lying down beside a dead giraffe. I mean, what is your view on that particular aspect of it? The picture taking of yourself beside big game, or any game for that matter, which then gets picked up and run with in social media, and then you can maybe talk about the circumstances around that particular very poorly made documentary.
I don't even want to call it a documentary, actually.
Yeah, it was a piece of wallpaper television. It was very lowbrow and rather poorly done, just to fit in a half-hour slot or whatever it was. But let's start with the question of taking photographs with animals that you've shot. I think that's something which is often the first point of revulsion for a lot of people. They say, why do you go out and shoot these animals so you can have your photographs taken with them? And to a certain degree, this is one of the reasons I'm not particularly enamored of the term trophy hunting, because I think if you use the word trophy hunting, it suggests that the only point is the trophy. That, in a way, you're going out shopping for a set of horns or a skull or a rug. And that, the going to the country, kitting yourself out, getting fit, preparing yourself, learning how to shoot, learning how to shoot in difficult conditions, learning how to shoot when you're tired, when you've been tracking something for hours, learning to read the signs, learning to read how animals behave and how they react, so that when the time comes to take a shot, you don't mess it up, are all incidental things of no consequence. That all you're really motivated by is the collection of this particular trophy, whether it be a photograph, whether it be a part of the animal. Where, of course, anybody who's ever been involved in it knows that the trophy itself is only a very small part of it. It's a memento of the whole experience, from deciding where you're going to go and what you're going to hunt, to going through all the preparation necessary, both physically, mentally, and equipment-wise, in order to make that happen. It's the interaction with the environment, with the animals, with the possibility of failure, with the stress, with the responsibility, all of that being successfully negotiated leads you up to that point where it's over. The animal's on the ground, everything's hopefully gone according to plan, and you're now at the end of that journey. And I think as human beings, we often like to record things like this. There are millions of fishermen in the UK who catch a fish and take a photograph of themselves holding the fish. We don't seem to, the public at large don't seem to think there's anything weird about that. When I mentioned on Piers Morgen's show, the rugby team photographs I've got of me with my rugby team with various things that we've done, they are snapshots of an important moment in your life. In terms of the trophy heads that people take, whether it's taxidermy, whether it's a set of horns, again, it's a memento of that entire experience. And you can sit there in your office or in your study and you see those horns up on your wall, and it takes you back to a time when you were perhaps younger and fitter and more able, and in a place where you aren't anymore, in a place which has changed since you were there, with people that you came to respect and know and understand, who you are no longer with, or in some cases are no longer with us. And it takes you back there. And that's always going to serve as a memento of that part of your life and how you interacted with that particular environment, that particular challenge, and how it culminated in picking up this particular animal.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to explain to people who have never done it or experienced it. And I wondered how you would put it to people ignorant or uneducated in what it means to hunt anything, hunt full stop, of why it's still relevant in the modern world. Why do we need to do this? And especially when there are undoubtedly circumstances where there are people who their only desire is to go and stick a head on their wall. They don't really care about everything else that goes into it. In fact, the film on Channel 4, the one girl there who was from Canadian Croatian, I kind of got the impression that she was really just a collector of stuff on her wall more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I find it difficult to talk about other people's motivation. And as I said to you before, I'm certainly not somebody who's going to stand up here and defend what I consider bad practice. Mm-hmm. When it comes to condemning other people's behavior, or, judging whose motivation is good and whose motivation is bad, I think you can quite often get onto very sticky ground. I would say, going back to your first question, what is it? Why do we need to hunt? Well, we don't need to hunt, but there are a lot of things that we as modern as modern citizens don't need to do. We don't need to fight. Generally, we don't need to defend ourselves. We have a police force and an army that does that. Yet some people want to be able to fight, and some people want to fight. I mean, we study martial arts, we'll study boxing, because it teaches us things about ourselves. It puts us into places where otherwise we wouldn't necessarily ever be, and we test ourselves under those circumstances. We test ourselves physically, we test ourselves in terms of our courage, our mentality, our stability, and we learn about ourselves by tapping into those deep-rooted parts of ourselves, which help us to become human. I think for some people, they want, we feel we want to maintain a connection with the more elemental parts of our nature. Fighting might be one of those. I mean, I've studied martial arts for a lot of my life, and it's not because I want to go and punch people in the face. In fact, the more that you study martial arts and the more capable you get, the less inclined you are to hit anybody. And paradoxically, the less likely as well. In terms of hunting, to be able to go out into nature and feel at home with it, to be able to go out and pursue quarry, whether it's dangerous quarry or whether it's edible quarry or both, on its own terms, in its own environment, using relatively primitive tools. I mean, I don't go and hunt big game with telescopic sights. I use open sights. I tend to use pretty rudimentary equipment. And people have said to me, how dangerous can it be? You're standing there looking at an elephant or a buffalo and blasting it with an enormous rifle. It must be the easiest thing in the world. Well, of course, connecting with part of an elephant or part of a buffalo at 20 yards with a big rifle, as long as you're reasonably competent in its use, isn't very difficult. Hitting it in the right place so that it dies and doesn't come and tread on you or squash you is a little bit more difficult, especially when you throw in all the conditions, visibility, terrain, not quite knowing when you're going to get the chance for a shot, choosing the right moment to take it, choosing the right place to take it, making sure your nerve holds, making sure that you don't flinch, making sure that all your skills are where they need to be. This is teaching you about yourself and about nature in the raw. So from those are all those are all parts of it for me. I mean, taking it further, I like hunting animals and I like eating the animals that I hunt. I don't think anybody could legitimately argue that it's more humane to breed a chicken in a chicken farm in the dark, injected with steroids and fed on rapid growth hormones, and then industrially kill it after 3 months and process it so that we have cheap chicken, and then say that to go out and shoot a pheasant which is free roaming and able to take its chances in the natural world, and get shot and eaten, I think the simple test of that is, you're going to be reincarnated. Pick which animal you'd like to be.
Yeah, that's a fairly easy answer there.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to try and explain to the public who don't do it all that you've done. Well, you've done a very good job of explaining how important everything is and what is involved as a hunter out with actually pulling the trigger. It is a lot easier to explain it from a point of view of food and the ethics of taking wild game, as opposed to, I'm not saying that there's an issue with all farmed food, but and the example that you just gave there with chickens, that's something that happens the world over in probably every country. But that, and combined with the conservation aspect of it, which we're getting better at telling that story, but historically we haven't been very good, and it's never more true than in a continent like Africa, where
that's true, but it's also true of England. If you look at the English countryside, I mean, I think most people sitting on a train and going through the English countryside and looking out of the window, they may not notice, hills with woods on the top of them, gullies with woods on the sides of them, bracken banks, dingles and places which are left quite wild. Now, I wonder how often they think, well, we live in an agricultural environment. Why do the farmers not just plant crops on all of that land? Why do they not strip it right down to the water's edge and graze animals or plant crops on every available square inch? Well, the answer largely and historically has been because of shooting and hunting. These areas would be left as preserves for wild animals to thrive and to survive, to provide a huntable surplus. without those, without that hunting motivation and the value that hunters place on wild animals and their continuance, we simply have taken the avenue that a lot of countries did, where you see monoculture agriculture going on with absolutely nothing left apart from horizon to horizon agricultural industry going on.
Yeah, that's often, and you see it online all the time. The number one argument that you have for the anti-organizations for the grouse moors and stop grouse shooting is that they're a monoculture up on the grouse moors, which probably couldn't be furthest from the truth if you actually step on them.
Absolutely, yeah. But again, that's very much a piece of opportunism by George Monbiot, I think, whereby he saw a little bit of a downstream issue with flooding, and then quite cynically decided to write a very misinformation providing piece, suggesting that the management of grouse moors was responsible for flooding further down. And this, of course, comes back to the problem that a lot of the time we're not dealing with honest brokers. We're not dealing with people who want to look at information and make up their minds based on that. They have a narrative, and they pick and choose information and make things up which support their narrative and ignore everything else. I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, the American presenter, recently said something along the lines of somebody who's inquisitive will question and then seek evidence to verify the answers, whereas somebody who's a denier will question and then ignore the evidence in order to maintain their own stance. And I think we increasingly face that people are not interested in the truth. People talk about post-truth politics and Donald Trump. We had Michael Gove recently saying, I think that the British people have had enough of experts. There's an anti-intellectualism that's going on in the country, I think, at the moment, and in the world at large. And I think a lot of it is fed by the idea that people bring up their little darlings on, that everybody's opinion is as valid as everybody else's. Well, I'm sorry, your ignorant opinion is not as valid as my informed opinion. And I'd apply that to myself on objects, on matters of which I'm uninformed or lack expertise. When it comes to economics, I defer to my friends who've got, work backgrounds and academic backgrounds in economics, because to me, some of the stuff that I think is intuitive is wrong, and I find that a lot when I'm combating people who simply aren't intellectually curious or intellectually honest enough to change their minds when faced with overwhelming evidence.
And I think that's compounded by the age that we live in, where it's so easy to pass judgment, pass comment, and fling it online for the world to see without really having any repercussion, because you're not having a face-to-face conversation with someone and you can completely ignore the counter-argument.
And I guess you'll know firsthand from this after your Piers Morgen experience of the comments and emails you received of the days after.
Oh yeah.
I believe that you have a couple of those prepared for us now. When we put this out, we will put a beep in, because I know that there might be a few things that we might just have to censor slightly. But feel free to read them as they came out, just as a taster of the kind of people who, the kind of people and how they react to the very level-headed discussion that you were trying to have on that television program.
Yeah, I did get quite a lot of quite interesting emails and tweets in particular from... I would love to see how far you get trying to hunt non-human animals without a gun. Maybe just try not to enjoy the killing so much. Yeah? Why not just give £3,000 to them and not kill a buffalo? I rarely kill after giving to charity. Hunting lions is not sustainable. This one's from Chris Davis. So, you think killing a defenceless animal for pleasure is helping wildlife conservation? What a f***ing moronic thing to say. Say it as it is, you kill animals. Go big game hunting for pleasure. So what is your answer for so many animals going extinct? Or nearly going extinct? Oh yeah, that's right, because of selfish like you. I really hope you get a terminal illness and die, you Or better still, let's meet up so I can smash your face in. Thank you, Chris, very helpful. This one's from Roy Sevier. Great interview on GMTV this morning. I think you may become the #1 hated person in the UK by the end of the week after that. Must be epic killing majestic beasts. To stroke your ego, wanker. And here's another from Cherilyn Haber. If we can kill you ourselves in America, we will, you and we will see who's the bigger person when you with someone your own size, instead of being such a tiny dick. What was wrong with your mother to raise such a scumbag like you? Anyway, was she born with brain damage? Go the away, you disgrace of a human. I will pray for you the day you meet your maker. Hopefully, it will be soon. Thank you, Sherilyn. And Fiona Frankland. Diggory, the ugly, evil scum hunter. Hope one of them gores you one of these days, your evil scum. Liam Parker. Nice work today on Good Morning Britain, trying to justify game hunting. You're the lowest form of scum. If you want to hunt game, why don't you use your hands to wound and kill them rather than a powerful shotgun? You f***ing idiot. A nice pithy one here from Matty Tongue. Absolute scumbag. Die. That's the choicest of them all.
I think there's a couple of those statements in there which you see time and time and time again. Like the classic one, which is an ignorance to how the world actually works, is why do you not just give the money instead of going to hunt it? Well, if that was the case, there are plenty of other people in this world who can go and buy animals, and they don't. And it's the hunters who are going, and they are experiencing that all-encompassing experience that you were talking about half an hour ago, who are putting the money into these areas and into these conservancies, and the spin-off of that is the anti-poaching. They are picking up snares and all the metalwork that is put down, and is in fact the real danger for, in particular, Africa with regard to poaching.
I mean, Ricky Gervais is a prime example. He has a huge amount of money, and I would say, I mean, I don't know 100%, but I know that he has good ties with the League Against Cruel Sport, so I imagine any money that he is giving is probably going into them.
Well, Ricky Gervais is an interesting case in point, and I think it shows the intellectual dishonesty and lack of curiosity among even, again, intelligent people. Ricky Gervais is an intelligent and relatively sophisticated human being. When you watch Ricky Gervais talking on religion, he makes absolute sense. He applies his faculties to the question of religion and its basic absurdity, and he tackles it and he tells it like it is. And he's lucid and difficult to argue with unless you're blinkered, as the religious, of course, are. And they will argue from a religious standpoint. And I think what Ricky Gervais does when it comes to his ideas about animals and his ideas about hunting, what he does is akin to the religious argument for religion. He uses evidence, reason, argument to combat religious dogma, yet he ignores those same valid criteria when it comes to considering his own position towards the hunting of animals. It's a complete disconnect, and it's a blind spot that he seems to deliberately, or perhaps unconscious, is unable to tackle, despite his clear intelligence and his proven ability to do that on other subjects.
Would you say that people like Ricky Gervais, as a few other famous characters as well, do more damage to conservation by doing what they're doing?
Well, I don't know what else Ricky Gervais does. I mean, my where he comes onto my radar is, as you say, when he's making derogatory or negative or combative or rude tweets about people whose trophy photographs have turned up in his view. I mean, I don't know if he does anything positive. He may very well, so I'm not going to say he doesn't. So I don't know what his contribution is, whether it's a positive one or a negative one. I would say to him, if he and I were sitting together, that if what he's really interested in is the long-going viability of endangered species, then despite the fact that he personally feels squeamish and doesn't understand or appreciate the motives of hunters, there's a lot more in common between an ethical, conservation-minded hunter and him than he probably appreciates,
or would maybe want to believe.
Yeah.
I think that one of the great battles that we face is this constant blurring of the lines between poaching and hunting, and people just tend to assume, especially when you're talking about the big animals of this planet, your elephants and the majestic lions, is that they are becoming extinct because they are being hunted. Yes, they are being hunted, but they are being hunted by poachers, and that is the reason.
This is a really good point, and I think you're absolutely right. And it's one of the things I was intending to try and get across to Piers, the difference between hunting and poaching. And I think I forget her name, the woman that's on the sofa with Piers, Susanna Reid.
Yeah.
She said while they were playing the footage of Prince William and Kate Middleton in India, she at the tiger reserve, she said, "Oh, they've got guards there who are protecting the tigers from poachers and trophy hunters." Well, there we have it in a nutshell. That assumption that trophy hunters, like poachers, are these shady characters operating illegally to the detriment of everything they come into contact with. And of course, the difference between a trophy hunter and a poacher, or any ethical hunter and a poacher, is quite clear. And a poacher will go to any given area and kill everything they can possibly kill in any way available to them as quickly as possible, in order to maximize the amount of money they make from proceeds in the shortest possible time, either before they have to leave or before they get caught. They have no interest in the future of the place that they're hunting or the animals that they're hunting, whereas a hunter will go and hunt a particular animal, a designated animal or a designated type of animal, in an area which it's been scientifically studied to show how many animals can be taken off sustainably, which animals should be taken off and when and how, and we'll hunt them in an ethical way with a possibility and an acceptance of the possibility of failure, for reasons which are, I think, justifiable, but also in terms of the impact that they have, they are totally sustainable. If we have an environment in which managed hunting is a part of the conservation plan, that environment is safe in perpetuity. If we have an area which is not managed and in which poaching is allowed to carry on, what we end up with is utterly degraded habitat, with no animals on
Yeah.
it. And there are numerous case studies that show that to be entirely the case.
Yeah, it's a very sad state of affairs. What is happening, well, across the planet, but particularly in Africa right now, with regard to the ivory poaching, the trade of rhino horn, and it's not talked about as much, but the illegal killing of lions as well. And it is only those areas that have concerted efforts in hunting concessions which are able to hold on to their populations right now, and it's something that a lot of people don't appreciate.
Well, absolutely, and of course, we also need to look at the issue with population and land use. There were one. There were 120 million Africans in 1900, and I think there were due to be 2.4 billion by 2050, which is double the number that there are now. That's just Africans in Africa. The landmass hasn't got any bigger. So when you're looking at the available land and the massively increasing number of peoples who are putting pressure on that land, in order to maintain any areas at all for wildlife habitat, they have to see a value in that, because otherwise, as we've seen in the past, all that they do is encroach and encroach and encroach, and wildlife habitat becomes cattle grazing. Cattle need vastly more acreage per head themselves, because they're not naturally inclined to live in those areas, whereas the wild game animals are. So you end up with massive cattle ranching degrades the land enormously and denudes it of its natural ungulates and the predators that prey on them. So in order for areas of land to be maintained in the future for natural populations in Africa and elsewhere, there has to be a monetary value that's seen and appreciated by the people that live there for that land. You can't just put it aside so that people, sensitive Westerners can look at it and say, oh, isn't it nice to have that, while the locals are unable to eat. And there's no doubt about it that trophy hunting and other hunting activities that go on allow the environment to maintain itself in its more natural state far better, and it allows the procreation of the animals that naturally live there to go on in a sustainable way for our children and their children.
The argument that is quite often used to counter that, and I obviously totally agree with what you're saying, is that, well, why don't we run photographic safaris in those places?
Well, it's not either or. You can do both.
Hmm.
But of course, there are certain areas where photographic safaris don't want to go. When I hunted elephant in the Okavango Delta back in 2007, we were hunting in concessions which were basically thick Mopani scrub. People don't want to go there and take photographs because you can travel all day and not see anything apart from footprints. Photographic safaris want to be in areas where you've got open savanna, where you can see the game from miles off, and you can go around and take lots of photographs of giraffes batting their eyelids at you and springbuck prancing nicely and waiting for you to take your shots. They don't want to go into tsetse fly infested thick Mopani and traverse the black mambas and the puff adders and the lions that might be sleeping behind some tree that you don't see, in order to get within 15 yards of an elephant that you can hear but probably can't even see. So there are areas where photographic tourism just doesn't work. The other thing about photographic tourism is that it's far more hostile to the ground. You put two hunters on the ground to hunt an area and they leave no footprint, really. You put multiples into camps for photographic safaris and drive them round and round and round all the time, and they leave a much bigger carbon footprint. They leave a much bigger environmental impact. They also demand more. When you're in a hunting camp, you're pretty much in a tented camp on the ground. A lot of the photographic safaris, people require, they're tourists who are really there to look at things. They really prepare, they don't really understand what they're doing, and they need to be protected, and they need a much bigger, more impactful infrastructure around them in terms of camp and vehicles in order to protect them from their own inability to not get eaten or trodden on.
Yeah, yeah.
That argument.
The number that I hear, and I think it could probably be more, is you need about 10 to 1 to bring in the same income as a hunter. 10 photographic tourists for one.
Oh,
for one
easily.
hunter.
Yeah, I would think that's absolutely right. And as I say, of course, there are certain areas where photographic safaris just aren't viable. The other thing, of course, is that it's not a one size fits all. I'm not arguing against photographic tourism. It's the true path towards sustainability of African populations and African environments is going to be a multi-headed one. Photographic safaris are going to be part of that, and hunting safaris need to be part of that as well.
How do we take that that sort of argument and justification back closer to home? If we live up in Scotland here, you're down south, but the hunting is pretty much the same. In terms of how we maintain what we have and the management that we have, because it's continually being encroached and attacked by people who would rather see us not hunting stags, not managing moorland for grouse.
It's a shame, and I don't. If I'm being pessimistic, I don't see the mainstream getting any better. Perhaps we can combat it with education, evidence. My approach to these things tend to use reason and evidence, appeal to people's ability to process and to reason rationally, because we can't do anything else. It's the only weapon available to us, but we have right on our side because the evidence is there and it needs to be pushed forward. We live, unfortunately, with an increasing population who are removed from the essence of humanity and nature and how they interact, of life and death and how they're part of each other, and we have to combat it with evidence and reason. But I think it's a losing battle. If I'm frank, I think we're struggling manfully with it. But the momentum is with the sentimental and the ignorant.
My greatest fear is that eventually they will realize that they were wrong, but at that point it might be too late.
I certainly think in Scotland you're facing a lot of very dogmatic and political ideal-driven agendas going on, and again, people who are driven by those things are not interested in evidence and reason. They are driven through political ideology, and they're driven through a grievance narrative that they won't have challenged.
This is a very hard question to answer, because I'm sure that if someone could answer it, we would be doing it. But what can we change? How can we affect the people, affect the politicians, and make sure that the information which we've all just been discussing for the last hour and a half is there and is taken on board by the people? Because if you don't have people on side, as in the general public, you won't have the politicians on side, because we all know that the only thing that they're truly interested in is getting their job back in 4 years' time. And it's that is where we need to be. We need to sort of be forceful in terms of getting information out, and it's a really hard thing to do when we have a media and a general feeling across the public the way that we have and what we've just been discussing.
Well, I think all we can do is try to push it more and more into the mainstream and not be afraid to tackle it, and not be afraid to say this is who we are, and this is what we do, and this is why we do it, and not to shy away from the essence of that. I think sometimes we can be rather coy. And I think sometimes we try we try to mask what we do by minimizing the certain elements of it and trying to maximize other elements of it. And I think sometimes it seems disingenuous. I mean, if certainly, if I go and shoot a deer, the deer will be butchered and I'm going to eat it. But I could just as easily go and buy meat in the supermarket and eat it. So I don't go and shoot deer because if I didn't, I would starve, or because if I didn't, I wouldn't get any meat to eat. I go and shoot deer, and I shoot pigeons, and I shoot other things, partly because I like eating them, but also because hunting is part of who I am and part of what I do, and I get pleasure from it. It's a sport. Hunting, fishing, shooting, they are sports because there's an element of challenge, there's an element of enjoyment, there's an element of risk, there's an element of physical preparation and delivery that you need to prepare and put into practice in order to make it work. And it's a sport which has, I think, for all of human history, been seen as manly, been seen as admirable, been seen as essential in defining who we are as human beings. For most of human history, if you couldn't hunt, you didn't eat. And I think it's only very recently that people have started to disparage hunting and maintaining the skills as hunters that we have as human beings, which have actually enabled us to get to this point in history. I think it's only very recently that people have looked on that as something negative, and we need to push back. We need to make people appreciate that these are essential human skills which should be celebrated, and that when we do practice them, as long as we practice them in a way that is enhancing and sustaining the quarry that we appreciate and that we understand and that we revere and that we hunt, then we're doing something good, not something negative.
Yeah. I was asked by, actually just this morning, by my cousin, and this kind of goes on to something that I wanted to speak to you about, probably one of the last things, which is hunting ethics. And he had actually just been listening to a previous podcast, the one that was out last month, where we had David CP on there, and he was describing after the kill the tradition of blooding and the whole experience for this particular student that he had taken through his sort of training to his first animal. And my cousin was saying to me, why and how can we justify blooding an animal, blooding a person from an animal, and is it not disrespectful to that particular animal? Now, he is actually a hunter. In fact, this morning he shot a sika somewhere in the hills in New Zealand, but he is newer to that aspect of hunting, although we've shot most of our lives together with air rifles before he moved to New Zealand. And I was trying to explain to him the tradition plus the respect aspect of it and tying it into photographs. But how would you explain that particular aspect of tradition and how that ties back to the respect of your quarry?
Well, I think everything has to be seen in context, and this is whether or not you're seeing the Europeans putting a sprig of leaf into the mouth of the animal and laying it out, playing a tune on a trumpet over it at the end of the hunt to show respect, or whether you're putting some blood of the animal on you, or whether you're wearing a piece of an animal you've shot, or whether you're putting its skull over your mantelpiece. All of these things have to be seen in the context of the hunting culture from which they come. Out of context, almost anything can look bizarre and barbaric and stupid. And different countries and different cultures have their own hunting cultures, which have to be seen within that context. So, yes, on the face of it, blooding a child in his first hunt, if you see that out of context, it seems stupid, pointless, ritualistic, and disrespectful. But in the context from which it's come, it's none of those things. It is perhaps ritualistic, but it's it's showing the passage into from having not hunted to having killed your first animal, and that's something that you need to mark and to show reverence to and to treat not lightly. I think people who don't hunt and don't kill animals perhaps just have no idea. They don't have any perception of the fact that we who do hunt them actually revere the animals and take very seriously what we do. I think when you eat meat that's been produced for you in the supermarkets or just been put on your table by somebody else, you have a totally blasé and non-connected attitude to it, to the waste of meat, to the use of meat, to the eating of meat. People just see it as another commodity. When you're actually involved with, taking a live animal and putting it on the ground and taking its life and turning it into meat, I think you take that seriously, and you connect with it in a way that people that don't do that just don't.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that if you take hunting as a cultural heritage, be that as it may, the different ways that different countries and different parts of different countries have something which they would class as tradition of hunting. If that was any other kind of culture around the world and it was treated the way it is in the social media, there would be a public outcry.
There is, and I think, but again, I think all these things have to be taken into context, because playing devil's advocate, you could argue that, in certain cultures, dog fighting and bear baiting are part of their cultures and should be left alone. But I think you can quite quickly get rid of those things, because you can't. I don't think you can argue in terms of sportsmanship, cultivation, respect, and ongoing health of populations, that any of those things stack up. Whereas responsible hunting of free-ranging populations of animals, it does provide that ongoing sustainability and viability, which is part of the circle of life that we are. What hunters want to see is that circle of life continuing forever.
Yeah.
That there will always be those wild populations of animals there, that we will always be able to go out into the wild places and hunt them in the way that our ancestors did, and in the way that I hope our children and grandchildren will.
Yeah, and that is something very, very misunderstood. It is not about wiping species out, because that is what poachers do, and as you described earlier, and hunting very much is about making sure that you're leaving it better for the future generations.
Well, that's right. And I was talking to somebody quite recently who was saying to me, why do you pay money to go and kill animals in foreign countries? And of course, they completely bypass the idea that I don't. I pay money to go to foreign countries and hunt animals. And part of that hunting means I may not kill one. People don't realize a lot of the time that when hunters go out and hunt, they often don't kill anything. Yet it's not considered wasted time.
No.
Point, me and Byron were hunting for 5 days and we didn't get anything.
Yeah. Still enjoyed every minute.
Only a few weeks ago.
Now, I wanted to just finish up asking you something about or digging into hunting ethics, because although we sit here and we defend what we do as hunters, undoubtedly, and we did allude to this earlier, there will be some things which are done, or some aspects of hunting which may not be particularly tasteful, potentially, or necessarily right. And the first thing that kind of springs to mind with that, it has come up in the past. I have no doubt that it will be brought up again by people who are really just anti-hunting, but it's an aspect that they can attack. And that is this sort of proliferation of high bird shoots. We see it time and time again. You see a number of videos actually even named high bird pheasants. I don't have the skill to personally shoot them, so I wouldn't do it. But there has to be some sort of justification for wanting to continually push the limits. If you're continually pushing the limits, undoubtedly the opportunity for you to wound something is going to increase. And I have no idea what your views are on that, but it's just something I wanted to ask you about.
Well, my view on it, my personal approach to pheasant shooting is that, I mean, I shoot old guns with no choke in them, and I like to shoot pheasants in a fairly traditional setting. I personally don't see pheasant shooting, from my point of view, as almost like an Olympic sport whereby you're constantly trying to get higher and higher and higher and higher in order to prove that you can hit it more and hit more than somebody else. Shooting to me has never been something I've considered as competitive, which is why I've never had any real interest in competition or clay pigeon shooting. I think, knowing or having spoken to people who do a lot of high pheasant shooting, when they have the necessary skill, when they have the right equipment, what they want to do when they go shooting is challenge themselves to shoot birds which are challenging. Now, somebody like Dave Carey shooting his big heavy Marukus or Brownings or whatever it is he uses, I think they're Marukus, with very long barrels and very, very tight chokes and very heavy cartridges. And those are the sorts of targets that he practices on and is very good at shooting. I think he would probably say, if he were faced with 25-yard pheasants flitting over a tree, he'd be bored and unchallenged, and it would be relatively unsporting because he'd just kill everything he shot at. So in order for it to be challenging, he needs and wants to have targets that challenge his skill level with the equipment that he uses. I've stood on driven pheasant drives with a gun and watched pheasants coming over and stopped shooting because I felt gun shooter cartridge combination were not right for the environment in which they found themselves, and just stopped. It's only happened a couple of times in my life, but it's happened, and I just stopped shooting and watched the rest of the line, because if I ever get to the point where I feel that, when I pull the trigger, I have no idea where I missed the bird or why, then I shouldn't be shooting at it. Normally, if I miss a bird, I make a mental calculation that I was offline, I was behind, I didn't swing through, whatever it is. I normally know why I've missed it and try to compensate on the next one. If I feel that I have no idea why I've missed the bird, then I shouldn't be shooting at it.
I suppose you could draw some parallels with that to the increased desire to long range shoot, hunt. They would say hunt, I would say probably shoot, especially in America, where they're taking increasingly longer and longer distance shots on big game. What is your opinion? I think it's pointless.
I mean, I understand the long-range shooting idea, and I think a lot of the long-range shooting came from the people out on the prairie shooting gophers and things, sticking their heads up at city ranges and developing super hot small caliber loads to shoot them with, because that's the only way you can get near them. Fine, absolutely fine. When it comes to shooting dangerous game or big game at range, my approach is the opposite. I want to get as close to the thing as I possibly can, because for me, the skill is in the hunt. I never shoot deer further away than 200 yards in this country, and probably most of the deer I shoot are within 100 yards. I'd say the same with the stuff I hunt in Africa. I have no interest in sniping stuff from long range, and I don't practice my shooting so that I can. For me, and it's a personal thing, I'm not saying this is better than anybody else's, but for me, the hunting element is about being able to get as close to my quarry as I can. Pulling the trigger and putting it on the deck is a test of nerve, of shooting skill, and of being able to get in the right position. But I personally find the excitement, the thrill, the engagement with the surroundings that I'm on and the hunting of the animal to be more rewarding when it's actually getting on the ground and getting close to your quarry.
Yeah, I mean, I would most definitely agree with you, and it's the reason that I do a bit of hunting every year with open sights, and it's why I've taken up bow shooting, so that one day I can hunt with a bow once I'm competent enough. I do wonder, just with regard to that question of long range shooting, whether, irrespective of your personal view about how you hunt, whether we have as a hunting society, is there an ethical problem with that? Should we be
Well,
condoning
I
it?
think there were different kinds of shooting. I mean, I've shot. You mentioned your friend shooting in New Zealand. I've shot Seeker in New Zealand, and they were longer shots than I'd ever take in England. But that's because that's as close as you can get to them. So whether the hunting terrain requires you to take long shots, like mountain hunting for sheep, or hunting high up in the New Zealand hills for Seeker, which are very hard to get close to, then you equip yourself with rifles and sights that are up to the job, and make sure that your shooting's up to the job. In that case, I've got no query. I've got no qualms about it. I think shooters have always tested themselves to try and see how far they can put a bullet onto a target at a given range. And I think that's part of humanity, that you're always pushing the boundaries and trying to see if you can do something you couldn't do before, if you can do something nobody else has managed to do yet. And I think that's a healthy competitive element of being in competition with yourself in terms of your skills and honing your skills. And sometimes when you're in a situation where you're culling large numbers of animals, whether it be in Scotland or in Africa, you do need to take a lot of long-range shots with precision. And as long as you're skilled enough and you have the right equipment to do the job well, in the right circumstances, I've got no problem with it.
Yeah, it's all about circumstances, terrain. Is there a need to do it, rather than pushing boundaries for the sake of doing it?
It's all about context.
Mm-hmm. Diggory, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you and debate what we've talked about today, and get the first-hand account of what it was like to be on a sofa with Piers Morgen. I'm sure there will be a lot of people who appreciate the sort of behind the scenes, and I hope that there's a lot of takeaways from our discussion today that people will be able to have a think about. We're fortunate that we do have a number of listeners who are not actually hunters or fishers, or generally people who would spend a lot of time in the countryside and consider themselves as sort of country folk, but they're intrigued by what is discussed and what is debated. And I hope for them they will be able to, what's being discussed will open their mind, and I'm sure it will.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for another week. In 2 weeks' time, we will be bringing you a live debate that we recorded at the Scottish Game Fair at Scone Palace, run by the GWCT. The subject is going to be rewilding. It was a rather interesting topic with some great characters. So listen out for that in 2 weeks' time.
Yep. And remember that all of our topics come from our listeners. So if you have a suggestion of any topics you want discussed throughout the year on the show, then get in touch with us at podcast@paceproductionsuk.com. It's also in the description, or send us a message on Facebook, which many of you do. And we'll try and arrange the show. We've got Working Dogs coming up at some point very soon. We're already in contact with a person to do that. We have been asked to have gamekeepers on again. We'll try and get hold of them before the season starts.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to be covering Lyme disease as well.
We will be covering Lyme disease. And yeah, we've got many, many more things coming up throughout the year. So yeah, just send us an email, and
we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, we'd like to hear from you, and we make it happen. Now, it's competition time.
It is, and the competition is to win a Spyderco folding knife. It's pretty awesome. It's a good prize. You're going to have to be over the age of 18 to enter because of UK laws, but here is how you enter.
Okay, so a little bit of background to the competition. Just over a week ago, I took a picture of some milk in Asda, and it was an Arla cooperative milk, and on the packaging it says it gives 25 pence back to the farmers for every milk that you buy. I'll hold it up for the YouTube people. And what we want you to do for the competition is send us a picture of you purchasing British produce.
Any British produce. If you want to do it with the milk, then that's great.
Yep.
But any British farming produce will do.
Yep, it is. And hopefully that will get some more people to buy some British produce.
Yeah, we're a big supporter of British farming.
This this picture I took has now been seen by over 50,000 people, which is crazy.
Staggering.
Staggering. And we're still getting comments every single day.
The picture that you send in can be across any platform. We'll let you tag it on Instagram. We'll let you tag us on
Send us an email.
on Facebook, email, send us in a message, whatever you want. We'll take a note. The important thing there is just take the picture, put it up on social media to let other people know that you're supporting British farming, because we do.
Yep, we do.
Thank you very much for listening. Once again, this podcast is brought to you by the Scottish Association for Country Sports.
And it can be downloaded on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, and can be watched on YouTube.
No excuse not to listen.
No excuse whatsoever. So, yeah. Until next time.